So guys, this is video 4 of the Riley Pathfinder that we are restoring. Not the actual full car, we're restoring the leather interior as you'll have seen from video 1, 2 and 3. And this is 4 where we're going to do the repair to the tears. We're going to show you some filling of what we need to do with filling. Obviously there's a lot of filling to do on the seats. I'm not going to show you the whole video. We'll be here for hours and hours and hours because the seat's in quite a bad way. But we're going to be repairing this tear that you see here. We're going to show you how to get the backing fabric in and repair this particular tear here. And we're going to be filling in some of these lines here potentially. And then we're going to be going over to this side of the seat here, where it's all very, very rough. And this is where we're going to be putting in what we call fibre binder, because this needs all these fibres binding back together again. All this sort of area here where my finger is just over here, sorry camera, just over here. And all this needs the fibre binder in here as well. So we're going to do all of that, get all the fibre binder put back in there. That's going to bind all the fibres back together again to give us a much stable state so that we can then start to sand that lightly to get rid of all the roughness, and then put in the fillers, obviously repair the tear that's there and repair the, put in the fillers as well once the tear's been repaired. But there's quite a lot of filling to do on the seat, as you can sort of see over the whole seat, everywhere. This is a very old, it's an original seat, it's very old, and this has now been softened. As you know, we were going through, had to do stage 1, 2 and 3, which we wouldn't normally do. We just normally jump straight onto the leather prep and then do this stage that we're doing now. So we had to clean the seats first of all with the leather cleaner in series 1. With the video, we had to sort of like soften it, clean it, which is what we did, and then soften again, and then do the prep stages. So we had to sort of go through all those sort of stages because it was so delicate and hard and brittle was the leather. We had to go and clean it first to soften it, which you can now see. This is now beautiful. This is really nice and soft and supple again now, and this is can really press this very, very hard and scrunch this up, and this isn't going to now cause any damage or cracking on here whatsoever. You can see here where we're really scrunching this up, up against the grain and everything, and it's not going to cause any damage on here at all. The LRC softening cream has really done a fantastic job here on getting this softened up. LRC 20, I believe that is. It's done an amazing job. So we're going to use a water-based leather glue, this one right here, to repair the tear at the top. And then obviously this is the fibre binder, which we're going to be putting into the other sides over there. Then we've got heavy filler here, and then we've got flexi filler. Flexi filler is going to be where the cracking isn't so heavy. So something like this, there's a scratch right in front here. So something like this scratch here, just right in front, you might be able to just pick that up on the camera. You can just about see it. That's where you're going to get things like flexi filler going in, and then the heavy filler is going to be going into sort of much more heavier exposed cracking. So if we then pan over here, you can see this is more heavier exposed cracking here and here, and then obviously the tear, once that's repaired, you're going to end up with a gap. We're going to be putting some fillers in there as well to fix those. We're going to put some heavy filler in there to help disguise that. So again, you probably got like a bit of heavy filler in here, and then finish off with flexi filler as well. The flexi filler is just a much finer filler, that's all. So first stage, we're going to put in some actually leather on the back of this. So we've got to get in behind and put that in. We're just using some very thin, very good quality lamb gloving leather. It's a lamb nappa leather. This we buy from Pittards. If you want to know there, you can see Pittards. This is what we get here. This was approximately when they made that, and we just bought these skins from them. And this is a 0.55 mil thickness, so it's very, very thin. You don't want a really thick leather going in there because obviously it's going to be pronounced and you're going to see it. So you want as thin as possible. This is so thin you could probably just tear this by hand. It's it's really, you can see there, like it's ultra thin. So you want something that goes in there. But once that's gone in, and the glue's secured all this in position, that'll be really strong, and that's never going to come apart again. Unless somebody literally jumps up and down on there, with shoes on and stuff like that, which they shouldn't be doing. And this beautiful Riley Pathfinder, once it's done, it's going to look stunning that we're doing for Practical Classic. So we want to get a nice big piece of leather in there. You want to make sure that when you get this, obviously you can see that it's going right up to the seam here. So we're going to have to get the leather in up to the seam here. And then you want to come to about here. So we're about 1 centimetre and a bit all the way around the outside. And you want to round this off. This is going to have to be square, but you're going to have to round everything else off because then you haven't got corners going in, which, obviously if you put this in and you end up having to hook, catch it like that, you're going to end up with a very big ridge here, which you're going to fill. So when we're going to round all these corners off, so when it goes in, it's going to be nice and smooth. So you're not going to get any chances of that buckling up. So if we sort of look at that roughly like so, so we're going to come to about here somewhere. So if I just sort of put a bit of a scratch on that leather, I then know where I've got to cut that to. So if if we just cut that out, like so, cut along. I'm going to cut it much longer than what I need at the moment, then I'm going to just trim that off. I'm going to cut it to there at the moment, and then we can have another look at it to see where we need to come to. So we've got plenty there, and we want to come to roughly about where that line is, to be fair, about where the line is in the leather, this sort of line that you can see here. So if I'm going to put like a little slit in that there, like so, and that's where I need to go through to cut the leather. Once we've gone through there, we'll round off the corners, which will show you what we're doing. So we've got our leather patch in there. Obviously this is going in like so. So we're just going to round off these corners here, all 4 corners, but I'm going to leave this edge like that. So just round these off like this. You don't want them catching, just give them a nice sort of rounded shape, and don't cut too much off because obviously you're going to come near to the thing. So again, just enough to round the corners off like so. Each one, just round those corners off. Just so they don't catch and you haven't got that sharp corner there as you're putting the leather in to catch on it, to buckle it up, to give you a much sort of bigger ridge when you've put the leather in. That's the last thing you want. So just get rid of your bits of excess leather. And then we're obviously going to get that in there. So this is what we're looking at. So we're looking at something like roughly like that. That's going to go in there because we're going to put it in upside down. Obviously this is the suede side and this is the finished side. So we're going to turn it so it's the suede side up. So you're going to be sticking suede to suede. So if you tried to stick this way, obviously the suede's quite grabby, and up against your material fibre that's on the inside here, you're literally going to be like trying to fight against one another, trying to slide that in. That's why we always put them in upside down, because then you've got the actual suede side is actually going to use as like a bond to bond the leather back together. And then obviously the smooth side is going to slide in quite nicely in the material. So what we're going to do, first of all, is we're going to get a pin. Put the pin in the middle of where your repair is roughly going to be. And we can then place that literally inside like so. So push that in like that. So the pin is now going to keep the leather from disappearing inside the seat. So that's just like another little sort of trick that we've got that we do. Then we use like a little spatula type thing. You can buy a glue kit from Leather Repair Company, and it does come with this little sort of black spatula here. The plastic ones are going shortly, and they will be replaced with wood, because we're trying to do everything very eco-friendly, as much as possible as we can to protect our planet, with us being ISO 14001 certificated as well. So I mean, it's something that we've got to look at doing to protect our planet. So you can get all that in there and just get that pushed in nice and flat as well. Simple as that. And we just got to try to get that all in and push it all in, so it's nice and flat. It's not an easy job to do. It's a bit like surgery, to be fair. So we've got to. That's why you put the pin in there, so you don't go losing the actual leather once you're getting that inside. So you have to just bear with us while we're not talking, because I'm just trying to push all the leather up inside the actual seat itself. Got to make sure we've got enough coverage there to obviously get bonding to the tear itself, so that we can bond all the way around. You've got to make sure the leather is nice and flat. You've got to make sure you can't feel anything as well. So there is no easy way around this. It's just exactly how the tears are done, and we like to give you reality with everything that we do. We don't like cutting bits out of our video and editing bits and then all of a sudden miraculously the tear's done. This is exactly how it's done, which is how you're going to do this at home with your cherished classic car or truck, RV, motorbike, whatever you've got that you need to repair. Or even if it's a sofa at home, you could have antique furniture or modern furniture. It can all be done. It's exactly the same sort of process. You just got to make sure that goes in. And once that's in, you don't take the pin out yet. We're going to get glue into some of the areas. Then we're going to take the pin out. But you just want to make sure that you can sort of feel that you can't feel any ridges at all in the leather, which I can't. So that feels absolutely perfect. So the next stage is obviously getting the leather in there, getting the glue into the leather, so that we can bond that back together. I'm just moving fillers out the way here. So we've got our water-based glue, excuse me, and we're going to get the glue and just squeeze that in to the back of the leather. So try not to obviously grab the leather and move the leather around, but you want to get a reasonable amount in. I'm leaving the pin in position at the moment while we're putting this glue in. Obviously with it being water-based, you can use a solvent-based glue if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. We do sometimes use a solvent-based glue depending on where we're gluing things, and the glue that we use, I'll get you and show you so that you can see what that's like, the solvent-based one. We just get it from B&Q, so if you're on like a, if you've got, especially if you've got vinyl, you would need to use this, which is what we use, is Evostic Impact Adhesive. Because obviously vinyl has like a fabric back into it, like a foam fabric back into it. So obviously if you use a water-based product, it's going to soak into it, whereas this sits on the surface and bonds very, very nicely. So we always use a solvent-based glue, especially on vinyl products. This is obviously leather. But if it was like, if this was very close, for argument's sake, if the tear was very, very close and it was literally coming along here, then that's where we would use the solvent glue rather than the water-based glue. Because it's going to give you that immediate bond and grip that you need. And it's going to be a lot stronger bond and grip, especially on this seam compared to what the water-based glue would be. So this is fine for the water-based glue. This isn't going to give way when people sit on here. We've got them on the base that we need to repair, and that will be perfect when that's done as well. So I don't have to worry at the moment about what glue I put in there. It's not going to go off or anything like that. So we'll carry on now getting the glue on this surface here, because obviously we want to bond this down, and then we're going to get glue in the top as well. So once we push that into position, we can make sure we've got enough glue on there. Put some on the back of the leather if you wanted to as well. And then we're going to put a piece of tape over this as well, just to hold it together while we can dry this with the hairdryer to speed up the process. So which is quite good. So now we've got that done, I'm going to hold this down and then I'm going to pull the pin out so we can then glue the top half of this. So I want to make sure that that's pushed into position. Now the pin's out, we can now get the glue into this top half up here. Obviously we are going to have to do some filling with this particular tear. There's no other way around it other than to have to put some heavy filler in here to try to bridge the gap, which we're going to do, and then that'll be finished off with like a sort of flexi filler. But we've hopefully got enough glue up in there. You can get a bit of glue down the seam. With it being a water-based glue, it's absolutely fine because this will colour over anyway, so it's not a problem at all. The water-based glue just along that sort of edge line there would just help sort of to bond that back together again. A bit more in there, and then I'm going to put a piece of tape over the top of this once this is done, just to hold it all in together, and then we can dry that with the hairdryer. And it doesn't really matter if we got a bit of glue in there, it doesn't really matter at all. And then we just use a low tack tape, low tack easy tear tape, and we're literally just going to put that on and hold the tear together like so. And that'll just keep the tear held together. And we're going to put another piece over this way as well, just to hold it together while we dry that. Because we can speed the drying of this up with a hairdryer, and that'll just keep that held together while we dry that. What we're going to do next is we're going to put some filler in here. We've got a bit of tape here, so we're just going to probably show you on this one right down the bottom here. They're putting some heavy filler in here as well. So that's the glue actually put in and the tear actually done. So the next one then is obviously is our heavy filler, which is this one here, which is the heavy filler, which is a much thicker paste compared to the Flexi Filler. The Flexi Filler is very, very similar looking product, but its viscosity is nowhere near as heavy as as thick as what this particular one is here. So this is obviously what we call heavy filler. It doesn't mean that it weighs anything. It doesn't weigh heavy. It's just, as you can see, it's very, very thick. In comparison to Flexi Filler, which is a lot thinner. Product, whereas it doesn't sort of, as you can see, this sort of stands out, and this is a much thinner product compared to the heavy filler, which, as you can sort of see, is quite thick and heavy. So it's a much different sort of product. As I say, the viscosity is very, very different, and they do very, very different things. Obviously, Flexi Filler is designed as a flexible product, and this is flexible as the heavy filler. But the Flexi Filler is designed to fill in a lot finer cracking compared to the heavy filler. The heavy filler is more, as its term, is for heavier abrasions, heavier cuts, heavier cracking, whereas the Flexi Filler is for much finer cracking, and it will help fill those in, especially over on like a classic car seat base where you've got a lot of crazing and cracking. It's perfect for those sort of situations to use the Flexi Filler, which is what we did if you look at our series of videos for the E-Type Jaguar that we did. So again, with this, just get some on the palette, and you don't want to do that. That's what you don't want to do. Definitely don't do that, because this is going to create you massive problems to sand off when this is dry. You've got to try to leave the filler in there, just like we got here, literally just in that cracking. That's all where you want the filler to go. And that's why I'm using the spatula to just run that down and then getting the excess off. You definitely do not want to do that, because you will be sanding for hours and hours and hours, because it's a very flexible, very good sort of hard wearing product. So you're just trying to sort of go over with the palette knife. It's almost a bit like putting the icing on a cake, and trying to sort of leave everything so it's lovely and sort of smooth like this, so when you finish with it you've got no rough edges. So always make sure that you get rid of all those. That's filling that hole in there, look. And you probably need to do a couple of attempts with this, you know, to go over the surface, but you definitely don't want, you don't even want to leave it like we've got here. All this wants to come off, as much as this wants to come off. You can see we've obviously got a little bit here, but this is just sort of staining. There's nothing really there, you know, to sort of come off. It's just sort of marked the actual leather itself. So this is all you've got to do, is just literally get it wiped in as close as you possibly can and get it into that cracking. Any excess that you see on like piping and things, just wipe that down and wipe it off. And you're just trying to get it into that cracking to fill that in. You might find that with this cracking, that once you've gone over this with the heavy filler and you've sanded, you're not going to tell whether it's perfect until you've probably got your first coat of paint on these seats, which is obviously going to be the next stage that we're going to do. Once you've done that, you'll be able to sand it a little bit better and tell whether you need to put any more filler in there. And if you do, you'd probably best put in the Flexi Filler in now, because it's going to go into a much, because the cracking's much finer. It's a bit like putting a guide coat of paint on a car. Put your primer on, put a guide coat on, and then flat it off to see if there's any imperfections in the paintwork, you know, to smooth out before you're doing any other sort of work. I'm going to quickly give this a bit of a dry to see whether we can speed this up for you, to show you how quickly this sort of does dry. So it'll be a few minutes, so just put up with the noise for a few minutes from the hairdryer. I'm touching it while I'm using the hairdryer, so I'm just trying to make sure that this is kept pressed down while we're drying it, because I don't want it to dry off the leather. I want to make sure it dries on the leather. I'll have a look in a second to see how that's going, and if we need to dry that anymore. It may have cured it, it may not. We may have to do it a little bit more. So just be very careful how you're taking the tape off here. If it hasn't, then we can put some more tape on there and leave it for a little bit longer. So again, whenever you're taking your tape off, take your tape off, take it away from the tear. Don't sort of like just sort of yank this way, because you're just going to reopen it. So you want to try to roll the tape away from the tear. Again, just like this, just roll the tape away from it so that you're not going to weaken that or reopen that. It's certainly bonded it. I'm not going to put a great deal of pressure on there at the moment, because obviously this needs to still cure properly, because it's still a little bit wet in there, but it's certainly got it stuck down anyway. So I don't need to worry about keeping the tape on there now. We would be able to sort of dry that, either let that dry on its own, or we can speed that up with the hairdryer. So, the Flexi Filler itself. Let's have a look at the actual Flexi Filler, and we can show you exactly how that works as well. I'll put some Flexi Filler in some other areas of the seat where we've got some lighter cracking on the front, because this obviously hasn't dried yet. So I'm going to put some Flexi Filler in the front for you to show you how that works. So again, the Flexi Filler, as we've explained, is a much finer cracking, you know, sort of like for finer cracking. So if we sort of come to somewhere like this here, you can't really feel these. This I can feel a ridge and it's getting stuck with the spatula. These ones, it's not really sort of getting stuck with it, so they're much finer. That's perfect for the Flexi Filler to go into those particular areas. So this again is a much finer filler that's got to go in there, and you can see that's just about getting into that cracking. They are quite fine, so it is going to be a bit of a tedious job to sort of get that in there. But again, with this, you don't want to leave any excess on the surface. But you can see that going into all these cracking here now. It's going in quite well. It's just a matter of getting it into all the cracking all the way along. Obviously, the further we get towards this end of the seat, we've got this Flexi Filler to deal with, which we're going to have to deal with. We've got a bit of cracking right along that piping edge there, which I'm trying to get this Flexi Filler right into that edge, which we managed to get in there, so that's quite good. So it's certainly getting it into the areas that I need it. So again, it's like with anything, you know, you're going to get a superb job. It's just a matter of patience and time. Preparation to the restoration of your classic car seat is essential, and that is what you've got to be. You've got to be very, very patient, and you will get a perfect job. But you can see the Flexi Filler getting in there now and starting to build its layers as we're going along. You know, what you don't want to do again is just sort of put a dollop on the seat and leave it, because you're going to have problems sanding, and that's the last thing you want. But you can see the Flexi Filler going in there, like, quite nicely, and it's great for sort of like crazed cracking areas. So where we've got some like crazed cracking area here, you can see it going in there beautifully, look, and adhering to all that sort of crazed sort of cracking on the seat that we got here. Look, just it's going in there quite nicely, and that very fine sort of cracking we've got there. So it's working really, really well. And that's again how you put your Flexi Filler in. So again, with your Flexi Filler, you can either leave it to dry overnight and come back to it next morning, or again you can speed it up with the hairdryer and do it that way, and then again sand it, you know, once it's fully dry. We always try to sort of put the Flexi Filler in when we're doing classic car seats, especially seats of this sort of nature. If we're on the road doing a seat on a modern, you know, repairing a modern seat, we would just dry that with the hairdryer and proceed to paint. With this being a classic car and the seat's very, very dry, we don't want to sort of, you know, dry, you know, keep putting heat on the seats. You know, the less heat, obviously, the better. So we would then leave this overnight to dry naturally, and then we can come back to it next morning to actually sand it down. So obviously with your fibre binder, we put in with a sponge, and that's going into all the areas where you've got a lot of fibre structure that's sort of broken, like we've got here on the seat all the way around here. So we need to get the fibre binder in there, you know, which we're going to be doing, which is LRC 24. So again, this is we call this a watery filler glue. As you can clearly see, it's very, very runny, and it is literally like a watery filler glue. And you're just going to sponge that on and let that soak in. A really good coating. This will probably want a good couple of coats to soak in. What it's got to do, if you could imagine suede, which is what's happened here, this is almost sort of turned to suede where it's really worn. And what we want to do is to strengthen the leather in these particular areas, and that allows us to pull the fibres back together, to strengthen them up so that the seat can be sat on properly, and then we can get some sanding going on there as well. But just make sure you get them in. Again, you can leave this to dry overnight if you wanted to, or you can speed it up with the hairdryer, depending on your preference. But personally, you know, again, with it being a classic car, I'll just leave this to soak into the leather overnight, and then following morning you can give it a sand and then proceed with your heavy filler and Flexi Fillers as, you know, as required. But again, you know, it's just, you can sort of see it, you know, you can rub it in with your fingers because they're all water-based products as well, but we just put it in with a sponge and just get it really soaked in to the leather, and it's just going to bind all those fibres, and basically all it's doing is pulling all the fibres back down so they're stable again, like, you know, like your leather is here. Just make them more stable again, just like this is, so that you can sand it lightly, and you're still going to leave like a sort of grain impression in it, and it's going to look just as good as what it did do, you know, originally. Obviously, you're going to, with any repair that you do on a seat, especially when they're quite bad, like that tearers that we've done over there, you are going to see some form of a mark where it's been repaired. You can never ever make things invisible, no matter how good, you know, the seat is to begin with. If you're doing a repair, it's a bit like cosmetic surgery. You will always see where someone's had plastic surgery or a nip and tuck on something, on their face or whatever. You will always see where they've had a repair. This is the same thing for these seats. You will always see where the repair has been done, no matter how good somebody is or how how well someone will describe a repair to you about they can make it invisible. That is not a possibility unless you are replacing the leather with a brand new piece of leather. And the purpose of what we're doing is we are recycling this car seat and we are saving it. And leather is a natural biodegradable product anyway. So that's the beauty of this. It naturally biodegrades. So even if it was to go into landfill, it's a great product for landfill because it naturally mulches into the ground. Whereas obviously vegan leather, vinyls and plastics, they don't do that. They just last for over 1,000 years in our environment and probably then won't break down, whereas this can break down and mulches away, whereas plastics just cause problems for our environment. So the more leather we preserve and use, the better it is for our environment, and get more leather back into cars rather than vegan leather, because obviously the vegan leather is just damaging our environment. So that is your fibre binder, LRC 24, that's gone in there. Again, I'll just leave that to dry naturally and see how that proceeds. We will just see if we can give this another bit of a dry and a little bit of a dry on the heavy filler that we put in here, and I might be able to just show you what we're going to do with sanding to sand this as well. So again, bear with me for a few minutes while the hairdryer is on. We'll try to get these dried as quick as we can, and then we can obviously do a little bit of sanding for you to show you how we sand. We use a 320 sanding pad rather than a piece of sandpaper, so it's much, much better. If we can get the tear repaired, get the tear dried sufficiently, I'll be able to put some heavy filler in there for you as well. Certainly dried the glue anyway. So with it being a water-based glue, you can dry that with the hairdryer. Obviously, if you are using your solvent glue, your impact adhesive, you can't dry that with a hairdryer because obviously the more you heat it up, the more it's going to solidify. So you want to make sure you avoid obviously using a hairdryer to dry your solvent glue. We use a hairdryer. Don't use a heat gun, whatever you do, because you'll end up probably causing more problems. So again, we just use I think these are 320 or 240 sanding pad, 220 even, I think, maybe something like that. But they're leather is quite resilient to stuff like this. So I mean, it is quite a coarse pad, but again, you're not going to put pressure on here. You're just lightly going over the surface to sand this down. So again, just lightly over the surface to help sand this down so that when we start painting, we're going to be able to obviously see no ridges on here, and it's also going to tell us where we need to do some filling on the surface with the sanding pad. Once the sanding pad's obviously done its job. These, again, we just blow these out with an airline and just reuse them again. So they're quite, they're quite good. You can reuse them quite a few times. And the less aggressive they become, we can then use them for other areas on the seat. So like when we're sanding paint down or sanding lacquers down, we just then use them in those particular areas. So they get good mileage, out of it. You don't just sort of use them once and bin them, but this is just dust. It just blows out. And you can see now that's nice and, there's no ridges on here and it's really nice and smooth. So getting your heavy filler put into the tear repair up here. Now, there are different colours of heavy filler you can get. I'm just going to use white on this particular seat because we're changing the colour from this sort of bluey grey to a maroon anyway. But this particular one is a heavy filler. This is in black. And again, you can get different colours. We've got blacks, blues, greens, that sort of thing, reds and so on and so forth. So I mean, dark browns, etc., etc. So you can get fillers in different colours if you needed to. So again, with the heavy filler, we're just going to get this put in. And again, we're just going to go over the area that needs the heavy filler, and that is going to make that really nice and secure. And then once that's nearly dry, we can obviously then sort of like stipple that slightly once it's virtually dry and create like a little bit of a pattern on there. So when we're putting on the paint and things like that, when we get to the Flexi Filler stage, we'll put some Flexi Filler on here and we'll like give it a bit of a stipple so that it actually creates a bit of a pattern on the seat as well, which is quite good. So I might as well just carry on putting the heavy filler into these areas here. Again, try to get all the heavy filler off as before. Don't leave it like so. Make sure you get all of this off and get your heavy filler into all of these cracking on the seat, which is what you've got to try to do. And what our aim is, we're not going to try to fill every single crack to the top, because we want to leave a lot of patina in these seats so that they look original. They obviously are original, but we're trying to leave a lot of aged characteristics in the seat, so it's got like a sympathetic restoration taken out, that's been undertaken on the seat. So that's obviously what we're trying to achieve here, is like a bit of a sympathetic restoration on the surface of the seat. So obviously once this all dries, I mean, this is obviously, there's no excess on here, this is all going into sort of cracking on the seat that you've got here, which is what we obviously need it to try to sort of do. And once it's done that, we can sand all this down and get a bit of grain put back in there as well, which would be really cool. So that's obviously how you're going to be doing your filling, your tear repairs. And again, as I say, make sure get rid of all your excess filler that's on the seats. We've obviously got a lot of tear repairs to fill. You can sort of see up here where I am now, there's another sort of tear here to do. This is also split here, so that's going to be my next sort of port of call, is going and doing those, which is I'm going to be doing them in exactly the same way that I've just done all these here. So the products we have used today on this video number 4 obviously is the heavy filler. We have used the heavy filler, we have used the Flexi Filler, we have used fibre binder, which is this particular product here, and we've obviously used the leather glue, which is in the middle of those two. Turn it around, you can see it. And that is the 4 products that we've used here today in video 4 of this Riley Pathfinder restoration. So that's obviously how you do your tears, how you're going to do all your types of filling, the fibre binder, Flexi Filler, and the heavy filler. Thanks very much for watching. If you want to subscribe to Practical Classics, you can do. And we'll put a link in the text on the video, and you can hop on there and subscribe to the channel and subscribe to our channel, subscribe to Practical Classics channel. You can even subscribe to the magazine if you wish to, and you can obviously buy the products from us from our website, and we're here to help with any other forms of tutorials that you need help with. But that is how we're going to do the tears, filling, and fibre binder on this Riley Pathfinder for Practical Classics. So before we go, guys, I'm just going to show you what I was talking about a little bit earlier on in the video about doing the filler to put a bit of a grain in it, because obviously or else this is going to look smooth and horrible, because the leather is reasonably smooth, but it does have a bit of a grain. So this is the pad that I use to put the fibre binder on the other side of the seat there, and all I'm going to do is very, very gently just tap this onto the seat like this. Just tap it. We don't want to create too much of a roughness to it, but we're just going to create a little bit of a pattern to it like so. So it's got and then once we sand this down, we'll get rid of some of the high spots that it's going to create with doing this, but it'll leave us with a nice little bit of a texture. As you can see there, you've then got, all this sort of smoothness that we had here has gone, and we've got like a nice little bit of a texture on the seat on the Riley Pathfinder that we're restoring for Practical Classics. So that is how you're going to do that as well. So don't let that filler dry before you do that. We've dried it enough at the moment, but it wants to be a little bit dry, and then you can just tap that slightly with the same sponge that we put the fibre binder on with. So you want to make sure that that sponge is still wet as well, that when you're using it to do that tapping, because you don't want it dry or else it's just going to rip all your filler out before it's cured. That's how you do that as well. That's on the Riley Pathfinder for Practical Classics magazine.